have timed that with the music, really, shouldn't I? Oh well. Hopefully there are actually people watching. If not, I will talk to myself for a bit. But good evening. If we do, today we'll be painting some more NMM in this kind of style on another Stormcast, because apparently I can't keep one project going for more than one stream at the moment, so we're starting something new again. Now, as you can see, I've already blocked in a couple of other areas, just so we can make a start on those, but I may base coat in just a few others where it's looking a little bit patchy that I started last night. For those that would like to paint along, or are just interested in the recipe, it primarily only uses 4, well, technically 3. 2 of them are black and white, so we don't normally count those, because they're more used just for tonality. But the 3 colours that we want to use primarily for this are Scrofulous Brown from Game Colour. If you go and buy this in the store, it will have a new bottle, the new Game Colour, much better than this one, but I figured since I've got a nearly full bottle of it, I'll use this one up first before I buy another. Then Dark Burgundy from the Ben Comet's Signature Series, and indeed Ivory as well. Now you can probably tell that we're using Ivory as our main highlight, Scrofulous Brown as our sort of general mid-tone, and how we are going to function our tonality for the piece in order to get that very nice golden ochre effect. And we're using Dark Burgundy as a shade. Seems quite simple on paper. In demonstration can also be quite simple, but if you're still learning non-metallics, or this is perhaps your first time trying it, you might want to just have a couple of goes or start on somewhere out of the way on the miniature, just so that you don't lose any sort of real estate upon your mini that you could possibly have painted better when you go to do it later, or if you do make any mistakes or anything like that. But to start off with, we are going to mix up probably, let's say, 1 part Scrofulous Brown, maybe 2. Oh, instantly I should say by part, I generally mean the tip of this brush. This is a size 1 from Raphael, so that's how much we're putting in. To half a part of the Dark Burgundy, turn that into a nice sort of almost muted brown, and a tiny amount of black. Again, by tiny, I mean about that much. So we only really want to get paint just onto the end of our brush. We don't want too much to tone it, we just want to desaturate it a very tiny amount. And then what we're left with, yep, that's thinned. Probably should have got a brush up before I started, but oh well. Oh, no. That's not the right size. Where's the size 1 gone? That looks like a size 1. Well, anyway, what we are left with is a fairly smooth brown that is probably a little bit sort of darker, what would the word for it be? Not quite English uniform, I should think. And I will just show you how that looks on my thumb. Not in focus as per usual, but let's see if we can change that. There we go. So we're looking for a tone sort of like that. Kind of like a slightly darker Japanese uniform, I suppose, or a more orangey British English uniform. As you may have seen in some sort of like other tutorials, they're excellent colours to start with, just for this one, because I fancy having a bit more yellow to it so I don't have to glaze in afterwards, and to keep that fairly warm and weathered look, we're just going to use Scrofulous Brown instead. And I'll just show you. Yeah, that's the sort of tone that we'll go for. What else could we do? I might actually... I'm not entirely sold on having the gold sort of pendant thingy. I may switch that to silver in the end, just because having a lot of gold in one area, especially as we're going to have the helmet there, might be a little bit too much. Where's another area that we can do gold? We'll do his hip plates. They're fairly simple. And nice and easy to keep on camera too. So as you can see, we're not using keeping the paint particularly thick. Just turn the music down a little. It appears to be vying for me in OBS, so yeah, we don't want the paint to be too thick when we apply it because we don't want to get any texture or any sort of blotchiness towards it. Instead, we're just going to build it up over a couple of layers. Now I won't show you that on stream because I'm sure you all know how to base coat. But in the case that you don't, start with a slightly thinner brush, slightly thinner paint, and keep your brush moving quite fast, simply so you can move the surface around and you don't get any sort of pooling, but you also avoid as many brush strokes as you might get if you sort of put it on very slowly. You also get a fairly even spread of pigmentation over the surface of your miniature. And because it's not especially warm tonight, it's not drying too quickly, so I'll do another one as well. But hopefully with this you can see the sort of tone that we are going for. A little bit of orange, not too yellow, but also not too bright. But it's also not too dark either. That's something that I've seen a lot of people when they do non-metallic gold. They do start from a very, very, very dark tone, and I've done it myself, and in some cases it can work very, very, very well, and in others, as it has quite often with me, you'll find that you leave far too much of that shadow showing, and you end up having a very, very, almost looks sort of slightly dented metal in the end, because you have huge patches of shadow and then small patches of highlight. Now this can look very dramatic, and you might want to think about doing something like that if you're going for sort of like a more grimmer version of it, or you want stuff to look fairly beaten and weather-worn, or you're doing something with a very fixed light. But if you're just doing something that you've seen, like in this case just a piece of armour that could be in the sun, having those very sort of stark shadows and very large patches of shadow just covering over an area, it sort of just makes it look either getting that weathered look where you don't necessarily want it, or it won't look as metallic as perhaps you were originally going for. Now this miniature should be, the reason why it's sat like this is it should be on a mount, but I only primed that today and I'd like to give it the full 24 hours to cure. Otherwise we'd be painting that. It's a slightly bigger model, so it should come easier on the stream. But we'll stick with the rider just for now. And whilst that's drying, let's just see if... Yep, OBS is telling me that everything seems okay, so... No. Hopefully, if I keep it on the black side of the mats that I've got, you'll be able to see some perhaps easier sort of tonality than when if I keep it onto the white side. The white side is more for me to be able to look at it. Black hopefully is easier for it to appear on stream. I find that if I keep it all with just black over the surface of the thing, the light reflects either a bit too much of it or none at all. It makes everything seem a bit dull. Which incidentally is what my phone does when I try to take photos of it. So, But while those are drying, and I can always mix up some more base tone off camera, so you're not all just sitting here watching paint dry with me, we're now, with our base tone, just going to add half a tip, so not too much, of pure ivory into our previous mix. Possibly a little bit more, just to get a nice jump up in tone, which I shall show you in just a moment, so you don't just take my word for it. Looking for a colour like this. Very much like Japanese uniform now. In fact, you could use this if you don't want to mix. Personally, I'd say mixing gives you a better result than just adding in pure paint straight out of the bottle, but whatever way you find easier. And now we shall paint the helmet of our Stormcast. So I think we'll start with a highlight just on the nose, because it's the one area that is protruding. And we'll want to outline the cheekbones a little bit. Might need to thin the paint a little bit more, being a touch conservative on that. There we go, that's a bit better. And just because it's quite a small surface, I'll zoom in and then hopefully I won't move the miniature too much so it goes off camera or goes out of focus. What we're doing is we're just picking out some of these surfaces just with the tip of the brush, using very, very, very thin paint, so we're not building up too much of a layer, and we can easily paint over it as necessary, but we're just establishing where we would like our lights to be. And I want to have quite a nice dramatic light change on this side of the head, so since we have shadow just over here on his gorget, I think we'll highlight around the top there, have a main light just where you can see my painting lamp reflecting off the paint, but then we'll probably shade this corner just here, but we'll still put in a small reflection just there. Add in a little bit of an outline just to make it seem a touch more dramatic, because having that sudden change to shadow as well as that can make it seem more dramatic, as I was saying earlier. But we don't want that to be over the whole area, we just want it to be where light would naturally hit. Same with, as we can see, the underside of the cheekbones. We don't want it just where that curve is, we want it on the other side of it, but we do want that patch of shadow underneath. Build that up a touch more. If anybody is actually watching and you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat and I will do my best to answer them. And if no one's watching, you won't have heard me say that, so you won't. So we're just building up the highlight just more towards where it's sort of like his forehead would be, because we want light to appear onto there. Then we'll have a small gap with our base tone, and I think we'll put a circular highlight just around there. Or I suppose ovular would be a better description. If it was purely circular, it wouldn't look as right. Now the beard is going to be quite tricky to highlight, in so much as it's lots of smaller facets on the inside of another piece, and I'm going to try to avoid getting paint on the inside of the gorget that I've already painted. And for this we're just going to pick out each of them individually, trying to leave a line of our original base tone in between. We can shade them afterwards, so if you do happen to be a little unsteady and you do get paint into there, don't worry, you can shade into it afterwards, but being a little bit more careful now just helps to make life easier later. And then we'll just highlight under the the eye. Oops. There we go, and we'll do his moustache as well, and the lower lip. With some non-metallic recipes, there is an old adage that you sort of have to keep and trust the process, because eventually it will look metallic. Unless, of course, it doesn't. Now, in others, it's very easy to see things starting to look metallic right from when you start. Sadly, this recipe is one of the former as opposed to the latter. So if you are trying this and you are following along, keep painting. If it doesn't go right, there are ways to fix it. If it does go right, good for you. Now the reason why we are, since I have put colour theory and whatnot in the title, the reason why we're starting with scrofulous brown as opposed to other colours that you might more regularly associate with non-metallic, such as the aforementioned Japanese uniform, British uniform, Baylor Brown, XV88, all of those sorts of things, is simply because it's a very, very, very warm tone. So if I put it next over the black, you can see it does stand out very, very, very well. But if you look at the final finished piece, you'll notice there's not actually a great deal. Zoom out again so we can actually see things in focus. You can't really see much of the tonality in there. Instead, he's looking a lot darker and actually not quite as bright and orange. However, without the tonality and all of this being in our mixes, we would lose some of that sort of ochre tone to it. And that's what helps to make and sell it as a gold or indeed brass or bronze or anything like that. And when we come to do our shadows, you'll be able to see how mixing the sort of scrofulous brown, which does have a hint of the sort of more orange tones, maybe even, I suppose a little bit of white must be in there somewhere, you'll be able to see that adding in indeed a red, or in this case a burgundy, really helps to amplify those shadows without making them too dark. Now I'll just do the underside of his plate. His hand might get in the way, so you might not be able to see this, but hopefully it'll be alright. You know what, I'll block that in a little bit more. I can always shade over later. Or we'll go out of focus, there we are. Now the downside with using scrofulous brown is it doesn't have amazing coverage, or at least the old game colour doesn't. This is probably why I should buy one of the new ones, because of course they have the new recipe, which most of them cover excellently, apart from their reds, but we'll see. I'll try and use this one up first, just in case the colour is slightly different. But other thing, actually, I can explain a little bit about light as well while we're doing this. You'll notice that most of my... clean my brush so I don't get all the pigment stuff in it. No, most of the light is centred upon this central area here, but then we do have other smaller reflected lights bouncing around, as well as that main central light just under the gorget and in between the pectoral plates. Now, because we've got that main central light, we know that the rest of our lights need to follow within a line of that. But then because we've got that central one that then splits into the abdominal armour, and indeed the secondary reflections hitting from over this side, and there is one just under there, you can't really see because his tilting shield's in the way, we know that we need to keep all of that consistent. So for the bottom of his armour, we want one highlight to be over this side, or rather one reflection, I should say. It's a habit that I've picked up from a while, and I really shouldn't say it like that. And another reflection, there we go, got it right this time, over that side. Simply because we do have this central light that would break up around his belt buckle and unfortunately around his codpiece, but we shall paint that a bit later on. Maybe off camera, you never know, YouTube might flag it. But we'll do a similar thing on the head as well. We've got that central light, so we want the light to be on the nose, on the cheek, on his excellently gilded moustache, bits on the beard, and then on the forehead as well. And you can see just from this angle that by leaving the base tone just there, sort of by the brow ridge, we can quite easily see that that's where the shadow should go. Now we'll darken that down and actually add some redder tones to it in time, as well as on the cheekbone. But just adding that just already helps to sell it as something that is either sort of like a forged metallic surface. It just needs some shine and some polish to it now. And that's what we'll do next. Now we're going to add a little bit more ivory to that previous mix. So this should give you a sort of, I'm not even sure how you'd describe that. This tone, whatever this is. I've heard somebody describe it as sort of like a cappuccino kind of colour, but I've never really stared at one for long enough to appreciate what colour it is. But we'll start with the bottom of the armour, and you can see immediately how much brighter that is. And we'll drag our brush towards where we want our reflection to be. That's a very important step in all painting, is to always make sure that your brush is moving in the direction of where you want the paint to be brightest. Because ultimately, every single time you lift your brush off the miniature, that's where you're leaving the most pigment. And then we'll do it from the other direction. Apologies for that, Discord just decided to go mad and I'm not sure why. Just put a little edge highlight there as well. Actually, may thin that down just a touch more. It's not coming off the brush as easily as I'd like. And by adding ivory in rather than using something like a pure white, we're maintaining those yellow tones that are breaking into it. Now because we're using an orange from the Scrofulous Brown, adding yellow makes it brighter without desaturating it as white normally would. Now there's still some white mixed in with all of that pigment, but it's not so overpowering that it pushes it more towards the sort of the whiter, more desaturated lights that we could use. Now if you're going for a very sort of I suppose polished and more refined metal, which once I've painted this up I'll show you an example of. I'll just paint this in and hopefully stay in focus so you can see it. As you can see, emphasising the area just under the cheekbone. Something similar on his moustache and on the nose. Pick out the ridge just there, and then we'll draw our paint towards the middle and highlight the sort of rivets on the top of it. Get the other side of his brow ridge. And then place our light there. Apply that to the other side. And the other side of his moustache. And on his lip as well. And hopefully you can start to see that it is beginning to look a little bit more gilded and a little bit more metallic at this stage. Not quite up to the level that we've got here, obviously, but we are starting to get there. Add a touch of light just at the top there. Now, the reason why we're only highlighting the top is because light would naturally hit from the top, from whatever sunlight that we've got there, but we don't need to go all the way down. We still want there to be a bloom of light along that sort of bit that connects up to his cheekbone, but not as much onto there. We want a circular highlight just at the top. Then we'll do the same for the cheekbone. Try a little on the moustache, maybe a lot on the moustache if the paint doesn't come off the brush. Oh no, seems to have worked. We'll start doing the beard, and then while that's drying, I'll just show you the difference between using something like white, because if we go for a more sort of ochre-rich paint and add white into it, we can get an effect similar to this. I'll just put them onto the black side so you can see. So as you can see, we have a very, very, very pale, very cold, actually slightly greenish gold onto this one, whereas compared to our other, if it stays into focus, we have a much more warm tone. Now, to some, weirdly, when I've actually shown them the photo of this one, they do believe that it is reading a lot colder. Now, I think that could be because of my phone, but it also could be because I took it on a white background, which is washing everything out a little. But hopefully you can see the difference between them. Now, adding white into this one does help to desaturate it more, so it all becomes colder. Adding ivory should make it a bit warmer, but we'll see. This is all very much an experiment, so if it goes wrong, it goes wrong. And what was I doing? Oh, yes, highlighting a beard, as you do. And I'm trying to drag the brush so that the most pigment is placed just below his lip. Because while we want there to be some difference into there, we still want there to be some shadow cast by the gorget, and indeed any reflected light would bounce sort of up off that. And if I hadn't glued the head on, we could do the reverse of the gorget as well and do some light reflecting off there. But I did, so we won't. Just make that light a little bit wider, leaving a band of shadow just between, or a band of base tone, I should say. And then we'll just highlight on that side. Little touch of light on the side facing away from him. And all I'm doing now is just applying another layer over the areas that I've just painted, just to make sure that we're using a nice, clear, fully opaque layer before we move on. So just add a little more of a reflection just on the underside of that plate. Just there. Right, now we've got some of our lights blocked in, we can start to approach our shadows. And for that we're going to be using dark burgundy. Thinning it down to probably a glaze. Now, I tend to glaze things a little bit differently, as I'm discovering from other people. A lot of people will put paint into something like a well palette, or they'll just draw it out. I just like to keep it on a wet palette anyway, and then thin it down like I would a normal paint, but just put a lot more water onto it, take most of that off on a piece of kitchen roll, and then test it out on my thumb. Now, because we're not getting a great deal of pigment left onto here, and the fact that I can wipe most of it off without it leaving much of a mark, or at least it would do if I hadn't been talking over the top of it, that's a fairly decent glaze. And all we're going to do now is apply it, dragging our brush from where we want to highlight towards the shadow, or missing like I did there. That might actually still be a bit too thick. Yep. Wash a little bit of the red, or burgundy rather, just into the eye sockets. Over the cheekbones. We'll add a little into the beard. Oh, there we go. Just on the nose. And because we've got light coming from the top, we'll add a touch more just on, actually using the convenience of the one bristle painting handle. Go by, not sponsored, but they are excellent. We can get that burgundy under the brow ridge without needing to. I should actually leave him like that. It seems to, oh no, I was going to say it focuses more, and then it goes out of focus, because of course it does. Another layer of this glaze just into the recesses and any areas where we've still got that original base tone showing. Now if we add any too much of this, we can just paint over it, it doesn't really matter. But it's worth doing it now just at this stage to make life easier for ourselves later on. And what I'll probably also do is, at least later on, I may add a touch of turquoise just into the eye sockets to make it look, since the rest of my army that this is for is primarily sort of ruination chamber based things. If you know the lore, they're probably the ones that are less human and have more lightning based thingies going on with them. There is lore associated with it, I just can't remember what it is. So adding in some lightning coming out of his eyes seems to be the way of doing that. But anyway, now we've got our shadows mostly blocked in. They're not exactly particularly neat, we'll neaten it up at the end. We're going to go back to our previous mix, take some more ivory, and mix another highlight tone. And for this, let's see. Put my hand over here, it'll hopefully show the colour a bit better. We want a fairly bright, slightly off yellow. And I forgot to add some shadow onto the bottom of his armour. That's annoying. Oh well. I'll do it again in a minute. And now we're just picking off the areas where we would either get a lot of light or where we want to draw the eye to. So I think we'll draw the eye towards the middle of his forehead. That side of the skull. Onto the bottom lip. Now, one of the big things to always remember with non-metallics is that edge highlighting is very important. I will attempt to do some on camera. Normally, this means that it'll go out of focus because I have to hold it very close up to be able to see it. So without my head getting in the way, I may just do it off camera instead to save you all from looking at the top of my head for a while. Yeah, that's getting there. We'll do another layer of that. This time picking out a few more areas. Just with the tip of the brush. There we go. The end of the moustache. Try and just highlight the edge. Might not work. And actually, from looking at it from this angle, that shadow there, a little bit too dramatic. So, we'll just go back to our original mix. Try and hold it at an angle, that means that you can see it. And glaze in our original base tone. There we go. Oh dear, the camera's not enjoying itself tonight. I wonder why. Whilst those dry, I'll just glaze in shadows just at the bottom there, adding in those red tones into the mix, and put a touch more just around there, and try and get it in the recesses of his beard. Might not be able to get it on camera, but I'm sure you understand what I'm doing. And then I do want something of a separation between that central light and that line coming off there. So just using the very tip of the brush, add in a tiny line of that, and try and pick out the two rivets on his forehead, only using the tip of the brush and some very thin paint. And we'll also darken that cheek there where the cape would cover it over. Might not be able to see it on the camera, but I shall try to over-narrate it for you so you can understand what I'm doing. And while I do that, so the other day I decided, well, I should probably start recording some content for this channel since I've got it, and I decided to do what I've seen other people do before and asked Reddit what they would like to see as basically ideas for either tutorials or for sort of ideas for videos, or just sort of things that they would naturally go to watch. And the majority of the answers were very, very useful. Some less so. A couple of people just told me the people that they watch, and I thought, well, yes, I know, I watch them too, and I don't really want to be accused of just straight up copying their videos. Could, but don't want to. And the overwhelming response was that people would like tutorials that are short, see every single brushstroke, but also go into detail on things like various sort of tips that are coming along, but also a lot of people want to see kit bashing and other things like that. And, well, I think, yes, they're all fantastic ideas for videos and stuff. They're not really what I'm any good at. So, while I'm very grateful for people giving me their comments, I think I'll be a little bit restrictive on the ones that I'll follow closely, let's say. Still, all of them I'm taking under consideration, because I may still do stuff like that. But just for the moment, I don't think I'll go down the kit bash and terrain and that sort of route. Just because I've not got enough room on my desk, so maybe in the future. But if we have anybody in the chat, or indeed if you're watching this as the VOD, if we have any comments about things that you would like to see sort of included, or whether topics that you would like to see done, please feel free to leave them in a comment. If it's things that I think I can achieve, I will certainly do so. If it's something that I can't, I will probably look for somebody that is already doing that, just to shine a light on some other channels who deserve probably more attention than mine. And, oh, it's the other thing that quite a lot of people said, is that they don't like in videos where whoever's painting will paint something up, they'll do something, and then it'll fade to black, and suddenly they'll come back and the rest of the miniature is very nearly done, and then they'll continue talking about the same thing. That's why I'm kind of over-narrating everything this evening, just so you can see what I'm doing at all times, and hopefully keep track of it. So now we're going back into our first mixture, where we added a touch of ivory into our original base tone, just to tidy up some of the areas where the shadows are now a little bit too dramatic, but, well, they're in the right place, they're just a bit too dark at this stage, or too stark, I should say. So just add a little touch of them in a couple of areas, just to make lights a little bit softer. Without making them too bright. And also cover over some areas that I got wrong before. But if you're painting at home, you won't have made these mistakes, so you won't have to do this step. Just adding it onto the other side. Give that a few seconds to dry. still not quite up there in terms of brightness or indeed of tone, because you can see the main chest plate's still a lot warmer and has a lot more oomph to it, which is fine. Non-metallic metal is, as always, a case of going back and forth, trying some bits, adjusting, going back, reglazing, doing stuff, getting annoyed, throwing the miniature at a wall, coming back, getting annoyed at yourself, that kind of thing. And I'm sure other people who do YouTube have this. They'll come up with something that seems very easy one night, and they'll try and do it on camera, and it'll all go to pot. That sort of seems to be happening here, but that's all right. Now just reapplying with our brighter tone, we're just going back and expanding some of our lights that we've just used before to make them a little bit bigger, and emphasising some more of the shape of the miniature. In this case, I think we'll have a brighter light just under his crest thingy. Crest, halo. They are meant to be sort of slightly heavenly. It would be a halo, wouldn't it? I'll just highlight the cheekbone again. And then we'll add in a touch more ivory into that mix. Getting quite close to pure ivory now, but still with a little bits of our original mix mixed in. And this time we're picking out nice sharp details, mostly with the tip of the brush, just so we have plenty of control. Should probably have picked a slightly more accessible part of the miniature to show you this, but still. Now just with a thin glaze of the pure dark burgundy again. Some more of it off. Just going to go through and similar areas to what we shaded before. We're just going to go in again. Except now, rather than even deepening our shadows, now we are tinting the rest of the metal, which of course you can't see because it's not in focus. There we go. And we do want to push some of our shadows more towards redder tones opposed to the orange that we had before. Focus, there we go. And each time we glaze, we do lose a little bit of that sort of polish that we've got on the others, but that's alright. Each time we glaze, we do push some of our brushstrokes back and darken them down, tint the metal and all of that. And then the step after that, as I'm sure all of you can guess, is to highlight yet again. So now we're going back to our previous two mixes, using nice bright tones, and then picking out those sharper areas again. And if you haven't tried it yet, trying to highlight things this scale while on camera isn't easy. So hopefully yours is coming out much better than this. Add a little touch of light onto there. Yeah, getting there. The dark side, and so this cheekbone, or cheek area rather, needs a bit of light on it. And we'll actually merge the two lights with the moustache and on there, just so it doesn't look like it's two separate pieces and it does all flow together. Hopefully by this point, at least at this angle, you're starting to see that the tones that are included on the helmet are now starting to match on the rest of the body. Now, it's not from adding any other tones, it's just, well, adding any other tones to the palette, it's just reinforcing and tinting of what we've already got, which a couple of steps ago didn't look, it still looked a bit too orange, and in many cases that could be because I mixed a bit too much of the scrofulous brown in at the start, or it could be due to application of colour, all of that kind of stuff. Entirely up to you, really. But now we'll go into some pure ivory. Reasonably thin, but still at the point where it's thick enough and it doesn't all flow off the brush, but still sort of like still at the stage where we can apply it on the paint and have it flow off the brush. On the model rather, not on the paint, that would be silly. And now what we're doing is just picking out the areas where we again want to draw the eye, but also where we want some nice bright shiny points to be. Again, these will be on edges. I'll just try a couple on camera, but it might not go well. Sort of came out alright. Probably should use a smaller brush, but... Oh, if you're wondering, this is a size 1 from Chimera. One of the, I suppose, round size as opposed to the chisel ones. Right, now that's a little bit brighter. Hopefully again you can start to see nice and shiny, nice and metallic, at least on the black area of my mat. For some reason the white area is really blowing out the camera tonight. I'm not sure why. Let's actually, if I turn down that on the camera, does that still overexpose everything? A little, but not too much. Hopefully that will solve it, and then I can keep it nice and centre in the middle of the screen. Now what we're going to do is take our dark burgundy, probably about a tip of that, let's say, and half a tip of black. Actually, half a tip may be too much. We want it to darken the dark burgundy and desaturate it, but not to the point where it's very, very black. Which is just a load of needless adjectives, I realise. Essentially, we want to make our shadows darker. The tone's sort of like that. Sort of looks a bit like Barrett Nile burgundy at this stage, if you're using Citadel paints. And for this, we're just going to very carefully paint it into the eye sockets. Because they would naturally be darker. And then I shall also have a go. If we do have children watching, some swearing may occur. As I attempt to put this nice dark shadow tone into the deepest recesses and not mess other areas up, which is very likely to happen. So just hold the miniature upside down. Just to get into those recesses of the beard. Now I have gone over the edges, but I'll go in with a teeny tiny brush and correct some areas there. But now it's just a case of balancing the rest of the piece before we go up to some pure white. Now, white in comparison to all of the other tones will look exceedingly bright, and if anything it will really push all of our highlights back quite far, which in some cases is desirable, in others not. So all I'm doing now is going in with our previous tones, and you can decide on your miniature, and I'll try and explain what I'm doing around, just to determine which areas need some more colour added to them, which are perhaps a bit too dark, a bit too bright, have maybe lost some of that colour. But we're working just with glazes, because we don't need these to be exceptionally thick paint. We are just at the moment tinting what we have done, just to re-establish some colour. And to smooth over some areas. So I was just there applying our sort of probably original base tone mix with 2 parts ivory mixed into it, into that tone, because it's a fairly sort of mid-ochre kind of tone, and that's simply because it covers over a lot of our previous mixes without being too bright and without being too dark. And it just means that then I have a reasonably bright tone to work from when highlighting on top, which didn't go well there. Now it looks like he's pouting. Oh well, I'll fix that later. Because by having that brighter tone underneath our then reapplied brightest highlights, we don't have the sort of opacity of colours with a lot of white in. That doesn't then become an issue for us, and we lose some of that colour shining through underneath. But we also don't have to worry about adding far too many layers of a bright paint, which can sometimes dry a bit sort of chalky or splodgy. And I'll try holding the mini upside down again just to get to his beard a little easier. Entirely successfully, but still. Is it going to focus? No, it isn't. Right. And now, just with dark burgundy, I'm just going through and re-glazing in some shadows. Still just in the blending part of it, just trying to eliminate a lot of our brush strokes. And there we go. Just trying to eliminate that white that ivory that I accidentally put directly under his moustache. If I move my microphone and move my magnifier out of the way and just go for a single light, hopefully that will start to show the colours a little better. But at this stage, the only thing left to do is to balance a lot of the paint job in terms of reglazing all of our mixes, adding in some other tones just in terms of brighter areas, and indeed just finishing it off with touches of white in some areas. Now this is quite a laborious process, so I won't go through it all on stream just because it'll be basically sat here listening to royalty-free jazz music on Spotify and putting very, very thin paint over an area. But I hope that you've been able to learn something from this. This video will be available as a VOD on the channel at some point, I think as soon as YouTube actually starts it, hopefully this evening, maybe tomorrow. And I'll probably come back and do some more of this. Obviously there's a lot more miniature to do, and we may revisit this just general topic on something a little bit larger so you can see it without it going out of focus and without my hand getting in the way. And as well, for anybody that might wonder, the reason why we're using a Games Workshop miniature for this is they're easy to get a hold of and they are somewhat expendable. If they go wrong, they're easy to strip. If it was a larger display piece, and because I'm testing out a new recipe, if it were to go wrong, obviously we don't want that, but if in the case that it did, they're much harder to deal with, which is why we're starting with these, and then we'll go on to the more display pieces later. But not that anybody is currently watching, but if there is anybody watching, I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.